one of the things that you remember from statistics is that there we can make mistakes. So, we may sometimes reject our null hypothesis when it's in fact true, and we may accept our null hypothesis when it's false. And so replication can be incredibly important in helping us recognize whether or not we've made a mistake. So we're going to talk about three different versions of replication: direct replication, conceptual replication, and replication plus extension. In direct replication, and remember the baby, persisting towards the goal experiment. In direct replication, in study 1, they do X, and they also do X in study 2. It may be by the same author, it may be by a different author. If we find the same results or similar results, so for example, this is what they found in the original study, and this is what they found in the replication, then it's compelling. We believe it. We can trust that. Now, there's a replication quiz that you can find on D2L. I'd encourage you to go through and look to see which of the studies that it describes would you expect to be replicated, and which would you expect not to be replicated. This is part of a pretty large scale and study done by the author or by a number of different authors, published in Nature. And actually, in general, the studies that people expected to be replicated were in fact replicated. But people were pretty good at identifying which articles would not be replicated, which is interesting. And let me just point out, these are all articles that were published in either Nature or Science. These are big name articles, not all of which were replicated. All these gold colored stars. Now, we were talking about direct replication. Here we're talking about conceptual replication. So, at a conceptual level, we're thinking about alcohol, for example, in the study by Bartholomew and Hines that we were talking about earlier in the semester. They initially, in their first study, were looking at alcohol versus plant photos. Then they looked at alcohol ads and control ads. And, what they argued is, if this theory works the way that we expect it should be, then we're going to find similar results in both cases. If not, we need to go back to the drawing board. So we talked earlier in chapter 13, as we were talking about quasi-experiments, we talked about this study where they're looking at the number of heart attacks and strokes after 9/11. And certainly there was a huge elevation during this period. After the 2016 election, and again, there was a huge elevation. And again, following the 2020 election. And remember, they are comparing both the control window and the risk window. And we're seeing that after these major societal stressors, we're also seeing an increase in the rate of heart attack and stroke. Now think about what kind of quasi-experiments each of these are. I've already told you that they were quasi-experiments. What kind of design are they? And think about what the independent variable and the dependent variable are. Now, we can also have replications plus extensions. So in this study by Mueller and Oppenheimer, they they were comparing test takers or people who observed a video, taking notes either on a laptop or by hand. And they saw a difference in conceptual questions, but not when they're responding to factual questions. What this study did is extend it. So this is Moorhead et al. They extended the study and they said, well, how does this particularly work? And so they asked some of the same kinds of questions, but not others. And notice that, their dependent or their y-axis is a little bit different than in the Mueller and Oppenheimer research. But what they are saying is there should be no difference between these two groups. And in fact, these are not statistically significant. And that they expected that the longhand group would be better on the conceptual or questions than the laptop group. And that's not what they found. Now, another way of doing replications is to replicate it across many different labs. This is a pretty famous study on happiness, saying that part of what makes one happy or what leads one to experience happiness is how our face and mouth and tongue are or what position that they're in. This is the initial study, and you see that there is a very large effect here, effect size. But in the replications, not so large. And if we're looking overall, and in the next video, we'll talk about meta-analyses. If we're looking overall, the effect size is 0.03, which is tiny, not worth even commenting on, except to say that this study was not replicated. Another way of doing replications is to have many labs looking at many studies, as in the slide that I showed you earlier, that was published in Nature. I'm going to stop today. Our next video, we'll talk about meta-analysis, which is sort of an extension of the ideas we're talking about here. Take care. Bye-bye.